The first thing I noticed was the smell near the loading gate. Metallic, thin, like coins rubbed between wet fingers and left to dry. No one else reacted. The dogs stopped at the doorway, claws ticking against concrete, handlers leaning in harder. They wouldn't cross. I remember thinking they picked up decomposition somewhere inside the airflow. That made sense to me. Back then, it looked like a small systems problem, something clogged or venting wrong. A filter, a leak, spoiled storage. Something you could point at and fix. Eli stood there and called it a ghost's warning, like that helped. I wrote it down and felt a little ridiculous doing it, but I wrote it anyway. My hands were colder than they should have been in that heat. That detail would matter more than anything else later. At the time, it was just smell plus behavior. Nothing linking them cleanly. A thin line of light flickered in a second-floor window after clearance checks. I looked up, paused, then filed it away as electrical noise. I moved on. By noon, someone else flagged the same doorway behavior. Her name was Carla. New badge, still checking corners twice. She said the dogs weren't scared, just refusing, like something pushed back without touching. I paused. That phrasing didn't fit any system failure I knew. She pointed at the concrete, clean, dry, nothing leaking, nothing broken. It looked normal. The metallic smell still hung there, thin enough to ignore if you wanted. Eli didn't want to ignore it anymore. He started talking about the ground under us, like it had a memory. Burial sites, he said, older than any wiring we trusted. Carla laughed at that. Then she stopped, somewhere before shift ended, without saying why. The dogs still wouldn't cross, even when handlers pulled harder than they should. Someone said animals always know first. I remember thinking that sounded useful. Not true. My stomach tightened for no clear reason. The story spread anyway, faster than anything I could log or verify. By evening, no one called it a maintenance issue anymore. I wrote it down and moved on. The second detail came in before the next shift turnover. Different location. South wing, far from the loading gate. Same building, same air system. A maintenance worker named Ron logged flickering lights in an empty corridor. He said they weren't failing. They pulsed, steady, like something pushing through the wiring from inside. I stopped reading for a second. That description didn't belong in any maintenance report I trusted. He added there was a taste in the air. Metallic again, sharp, like touching a battery to your tongue as a kid. I looked up and caught Carla watching me. We didn't say anything. 2 locations, same sensory pattern, same body reaction before anything measurable. Eli connected it faster than I wanted him to. He said the ground was waking up. Pushing through concrete, through circuits, through us. People laughed, not the same way. Because now it wasn't isolated to one doorway you could avoid. It was moving, quiet, without a clear source or limit. I wrote both reports side by side and told myself they didn't connect. That was the last time that lie held together. I was there to check systems, not chase ghost stories people needed to believe. That mattered to me. On paper, my job was clean, numbers, airflow, compliance, nothing emotional. In reality, it never stayed that simple inside those walls. Air quality, electrical stability, pressure balance in a place built without comfort in mind. I trusted instruments. More than people, more than stories, more than whatever Eli thought he felt. That morning, I started with the ventilation logs. Numbers don't whisper. They line up or they don't, and that's usually enough. The airflow near the loading gate showed slight inconsistencies. Barely outside expected range, nothing urgent. But small deviations tend to grow if someone is feeding them. I walked the corridor with a handheld monitor, watching readings instead of walls. Carla tracked me with her eyes, like I was missing something obvious. Eli asked if my equipment could detect curses now. I told him it detects causes. The metallic trace registered. Low, steady, below any official threshold. That didn't sit right. Low means controlled, not accidental. And that's where my thinking shifted. At the time, I thought I was tracking a leak. I was wrong. By the next day, it moved past smells and flickering lights. Something changed. The infirmary logged 3 cases before noon, so within the same shift window. Voices, pressure, something moving just behind the eyes. Same language, same timing. One inmate slammed his head into the wall until they pinned him down. Another said someone stood behind him, breathing slow, steady, close. We checked. There was nothing there. Carla stopped making jokes after that. She didn't say anything, just kept her hands in her pockets and watched. Eli didn't hide it anymore. He said the ground was taking back what didn't belong, like it had rules of its own. The story spread faster than anything I could document. 2 guards filed transfer requests before their shifts even ended. One didn't come back the next morning. I pulled the logs, looking for something measurable, anything that held together. Patterns, timing, spikes. Something that followed rules. I found none. It all looked random, or staged that way. The administration leaned into it instead of stopping it. They called it an environmental anomaly, maybe psychological. Nothing confirmed. Off the record, people used a different word, a simpler one, a curse. By that afternoon, they stopped calling it technical. Just like that, we were pulled into a briefing room near intake. The one with the flickering ceiling panel nobody fixed. A consultant joined by phone, voice smooth, like he'd done this before. He used careful words. Localized psychological effects, he said, tied to historical trauma zones and environmental stressors. I wrote that down and already knew it didn't mean anything. Or maybe it did, just not what he wanted it to mean. No one asked him for numbers, data, anything you could test. He mentioned burial grounds, residual energy, triggers outside current models. Eli nodded like it confirmed something personal. Carla didn't nod. She just stopped looking at me. The report labeled the wing an anomaly zone. Restricted access. No further internal review required. That part stuck. I read it twice, slower the second time, because that's not how problems get solved. It's how they get sealed off. By evening, half the staff wouldn't go near that section. The rest walked faster, like speed could keep something from noticing them. I filed my objection anyway. I knew where it would end up. I went back to the logs right after the briefing ended. If this was a curse, timing shouldn't matter at all. That was the idea. But systems don't drift unless something forces them to. I lined up incident reports with ventilation data and power fluctuations. At first, it looked like noise. Scattered entries, no clean pattern. The kind people point to and say unexplainable. I kept going. Then something small locked into place. Every major event showed up before any measurable spike in the environment. I stopped. That's not how cause and effect works, not in anything I trust. Cause comes first, always. I checked timestamps again, then again, slower, like that might fix it. Everything was synced. No drift, no delay, no broken clocks to blame. But the symptoms came first. Minutes ahead of any recorded change. Carla's doorway, Ron's corridor, the infirmary cases, all of them followed that gap. I leaned back and stared at the screen. It didn't make sense. Or it did. Just not in the way it should have. I built my first explanation around delayed sensor reporting. Maybe the air shifted first, and the system logged it late. It wasn't elegant, but it stayed inside physics. And that was enough for me then. I pulled calibration logs, maintenance records, backup server timestamps. I checked everything. Nothing showed delay, drift, or missed cycles in the data. The instruments had been clean all week. I sat there for a second, staring at that. Then I moved to the next idea. Stress contagion. People feeding off each other. Fear spreading faster than facts. That could explain early reactions. Until I reread the South Wing report. Ron had been alone when the lights started pulsing. No one warned him. No one primed him to expect anything. No shared story. No build-up. Nothing to trigger that response. My stomach tightened when that fell apart. I don't like restarting from nothing once a pattern starts forming. But I had to. Everyone else had an explanation. Mine just broke. I went back to the floor plans and wiped the board clean. When something fails that precisely, it usually isn't an accident. The lead came from someone who didn't care about any of this. That mattered. A janitor named Luis pushed his cart past the sealed corridor and stopped for a second. He wrinkled his nose and said it smelled like old thermometers. I almost ignored it. Just another comment. Same as the others. Nothing structured, nothing measured. Then he added he'd smelled that before, years back. In a clinic storage room. Broken equipment, he said. Stuff nobody wanted to deal with. I froze in the hallway. That wasn't folklore. That was a pattern with a physical source. Something that existed outside this building. I asked what happened there. He shrugged and said people complained. Headaches, strange dreams, nothing anyone could pin down. Staff just avoided the room after a while. I wasn't sure I understood it right. I reread his words in my notes. Slower this time. Different place, same reactions. Same quiet retreat from a space people couldn't explain. No ghosts there. Just air and closed doors. I wrote everything down again. Cleaner, sharper. Patterns don't care what people call them. They repeat anyway. I requested access to the sealed corridor before the night shift started. On paper, it was a contamination check. In reality, I wanted to recreate the conditions exactly as they were. Same ventilation path, same closed doors, same equipment sitting where it shouldn't. I adjusted the main vent to match earlier airflow readings. Then I waited. At first, nothing changed. Just the silence pressing in like the air had weight. Then the taste came. Metallic, slow, building at the back of my mouth like something spreading. I checked the monitor, steady numbers, nothing out of range yet. Then it hit. Pressure behind my eyes. Close, like someone standing just out of sight. I turned. No one there. I froze for a second, longer than I want to admit. That was the moment my certainty cracked. The feeling was too precise to ignore, too structured to dismiss. Then the reading shifted. Exactly minutes after it started, I watched it happen. I opened the vent fully. The pressure eased before the numbers dropped. I stepped back and just looked at the wall. That was when it aligned. Once the pressure faded, the numbers started lining up again, slowly. The delay wasn't noise. It was part of the mechanism itself. Low-level mercury vapor builds gradually in closed spaces with poor airflow. At first, nothing crosses the official threshold, but the body notices first. The nervous system reacts before any sensor confirms a problem. That creates a gap. People feel something wrong while every device still says everything is fine. Metallic taste, pressure behind the eyes, distorted perception, it all fits early exposure. Even the sense of someone standing nearby has a physical cause. Mercury disrupts how the brain maps space and presence. It fills empty space with something that isn't there. I stopped and reread the data again, slower this time. Then I added airflow to the picture. Shift the ventilation, and you control where vapor builds and how it moves. Some areas spike faster, others clear out just as quickly. That's the delay. Symptoms first, measurements later. The system wasn't broken. It was being used. Someone knew exactly how long that gap would hold. Long enough for fear to arrive before proof. Once I saw the mechanism, the whole thing changed shape. It wasn't random. It looked scheduled, like something built to run on timing instead of chance. The damaged equipment had been moved months earlier, not removed, just repositioned. Near intake. Near the south wing vents where airflow slowed and pooled, someone knew those points mattered. The dogs reacted first because their threshold came earlier than ours. That part made sense now. The flickering window wasn't anything supernatural either. Power fluctuations lined up with forced ventilation changes. Lights pulsed, air shifted, then symptoms followed. Every time, I stopped and traced the sequence again from the start. It held. Voices, pressure, that presence behind you, all of it mapped to exposure zones. Even the sealed corridor played its part. Close a space, call it cursed, and every sound inside it changes shape. Ron's report. Carless hesitation. The infirmary logs. Everything aligned. I thought it might still be coincidence. I was wrong. There was structure here. Intention. By then, the pattern pointed somewhere specific. The paperwork pointed to someone who never walked those corridors. That stood out. A corporate lawyer named Daniel handled every liability decision tied to the facility. His name kept repeating in places it shouldn't. He signed off on the anomaly report without asking for a second technical review. That alone wasn't enough. Then I opened the insurance file. $8 million, contingent on the site being declared uninhabitable. I stopped reading for a second. That number explains a lot of things, if you let it. Daniel had access to every internal report before anyone else saw them. He knew about the damaged equipment early. He approved where it would be stored, right along active ventilation routes. That's not legal work. That's placement. I met him once, in a glass conference room that reflected everything back at you. He kept wiping his hands with a folded handkerchief while we talked, not sweat. Just repetition, over and over, like he needed control. He asked careful questions, skipped one topic entirely, timing. The deeper I went into the records, the longer it had been happening, not recent. It stretched across multiple maintenance cycles, buried under routine reports, complaints logged, downgraded, rewritten as stress or standard behavioral issues, each one small enough to dismiss on its own. Together, they formed something else entirely. I stopped and went back through them again, slower. The insurance claim wasn't the start. It was the end point, waiting to be triggered. I found one file that never moved past internal review. A guard named Marcus had been transferred after sudden changes in behavior. His reports described the same pressure, the same constant sense of someone nearby. He left 2 weeks later. That's what the record said. I kept reading. His wife called the facility after that. That part wasn't filed properly. She said he stopped sleeping, stopped recognizing his own rooms at home. Their daughter stopped inviting anyone over. He scared her. I stared at that line longer than I should have. $8 million looked different next to that. I went back to the loading gate one last time. I needed to see it again. The smell was still there. Faint, metallic, sitting low in the air like it belonged. Easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. The doorway hadn't changed. Concrete, steel, nothing that should stop anything from crossing it. The dogs were gone. Reassigned? No one willing to bring them back to test that line again. Eli stopped talking about ghosts after everything closed out. Carla transferred before I finished writing my report. The second-floor window stayed dark. No more flicker, no more signal to chase. On paper, everything reset. I stood there longer than I expected. My hands felt colder than they should have, because I knew what had been there. Not a curse, just chemistry, airflow, and someone patient enough to use both. It had felt real anyway. That's the part that stays with you. How quickly people accept an answer that asks nothing back. I thought it was obvious at that point. Maybe it wasn't. So tell me this. If you walked in first, what would you see? A curse or physics?